They're lying to you, just like MK Ultra, about everything. Hi-fi stuff, audiophile stuff. The accepted truths are not truths at all. Today we're going to talk about the biggest lies in regards to hi-fi, and we're going to smash it all. So sit down, grab a cup of coffee, and let's talk about the 10 biggest lies and how they're not true because they're lies. Okay? Number one, the speakers have to measure, not necessarily like this, but they have to measure like, I don't know. They have a frequency response and then they have a waterfall response or stored energy. Anyway, there is an overwhelming thought process that a speaker must measure linear or flat, which I guess it can. However, even small deviations away from flat 2-3 dB bumps, troughs, are going to significantly change the sound. There isn't just one way that a speaker should measure. Frankly, for me, almost all of the speakers that I really love don't measure completely flat. And most speakers, if they just dead flat, it's not accurate. They can smooth things out a bit, but you still have to kind of push in to see exactly where the troughs and the pops and the dips are. And here's the thing, even if a speaker has resonance, it doesn't mean it's going to sound bad. I think Klipsch RP600M had some resonance. I know the Heresy had some resonance. Box resonance. That means when the enclosure vibrates. Kind of adds to the sound. I didn't think it sounded bad. Saying that you have to have zero resonance in an enclosure or that a speaker needs to measure a specific way, I don't agree with. I grew up on a farm, was in the Navy in an engine room, found a bunch of rotating equipment, so my hearing is probably not what it used to be, literally. Point being is that sometimes I like to hear things a little bit more emphasized, not in the vocal area at all. I like some emphasis around 10,000 hertz and above. It's a little bit more airy. A completely linear speaker, to me, sounds too forward in the mid-range and boring. And, well, not bumpy on the bottom. I am not a refined audiophile. My musical taste is fairly pedestrian compared to most audiophiles. But what I am saying is, a speaker doesn't need to measure flat. Usually that sounds flat. Don't let anyone tell you how a speaker should measure. Oh, so-and-so said this. So-and-so said this. I saw this. I don't care. Listen to it if you can. That's going to be another point I make here. Don't let anybody tell you what a speaker should measure. Like, it's a big lie. What's also interesting is that the speaker company that has the most brand loyalty is Klipsch. And Klipsch probably is the speaker company that has the least concern when it comes to flat measuring speakers, neutral speakers. Anyway, that was a long one. More money equals more better. That's just not the case, especially with different ways of going to market for hi-fi products. So if a product is going to a dealer, there's going to be a dealer markup. If a product is going to a distributor, there's going to be a distributor markup and then a dealer markup. So there are some products that are sold through traditionally distributed, methods. They're going to have markups. I'm not saying that's bad. It's not bad per se. But what I am saying is that there may be a product, and if all things are created equally, then a $2,000 product that's direct to customer is going to be better than a $2,000 product that goes through, well, a dealer. If their margins are similar. Obviously, we can all do math. I don't know what everybody's margins are, but there is an overwhelming thought process that is pretty much accepted as truth that if you spend more, you're going to get more. And I know there's an old saying, you get what you pay for. No, not always. Not always. Not in the hi-fi game anymore. You may get better build quality. You may get better aesthetics. You may get something that looks, I don't know, like a spaceship, but it doesn't mean you're going to get better sound. But here's the beauty of the hi-fi industry. It is so subjective that people can slap anything, a price tag on anything, and just be like, look at the refined design of this thing. So just because something costs more doesn't mean it's going to sound better. There are a ton of DACs. Ton of DACs. Really, the DACs above $500 from SMSL, Topping, Gustard, things like that, that actually when they get above 500, it's not that I think they sound worse than the stuff that's more affordable. It sounds the same. And so I have a real hard time with expensive DACs from SMSL and Topping. So don't ever think just because it's more expensive, it's more better. Because it is not. Sometimes it is, but usually it is not. This sounds like something 3 times better, 5 times better. I always hear that. This is very... When you look at Amazon reviews or written reviews, almost always, if it's a affordable product, there's always going to be someone that says, this sounds like, let's say it's $300. This sounds like a $5,000 pair of speakers. This sounds like a $1,000 pair of speakers. The problem is, all $1,000 pairs of speakers don't sound the same. All $1,000 amplifiers don't sound the same. So if you ever see something like that, just be like, eh. Or if somebody says, this sounds like a $5,000 amplifier and it's $1,000, that's just kind of like, I don't know. Something like that makes something sound awesome that we should go run out and buy it. I guess the fact that they're comparing a more affordable product to a more expensive product is a good thing because it shows there's value there. But to say that this $500 speaker sounds like a $2,000 pair of speakers, well, that's silly because they don't all sound the same. They have different sound characteristics. Maybe you could say this $500 speaker is built like some $2,000 speakers. But as far as sound, sonic characteristics, nah, you can't say that. Just go out and listen to it. You need to listen to it first. No, you don't. Not only that, even if you do find a place that you can actually listen to the products that you're interested in, it's not going to be in your room, it's not going to be with your music, and it's not going to be with your electronics. So if you're looking at a speaker or want to listen to a speaker, it almost, I guess it's good. If you get the chance, yeah, go listen to it. But it's kind of meaningless. If you're getting the overall sonic vibe from a piece, or they have products that are similar to yours, in a room that's similar to yours, then yes, you can glean some benefits from listening to something in person. However, I think it's more beneficial to find somebody that has a decent return policy and to actually be able to listen to things in your room with your music at your leisure with nobody standing over your shoulder making you listen to Hotel California, the acoustic version. I think it's a cop-out. I don't think it's people say it as much as they used to, but it always used to be, oh, you got to go listen to it, go listen to it, go listen to it. Well, I mean, COVID proved that that's nearly impossible. And even before COVID, it was harder and harder to listen to products at a showroom, and especially if you live like in the Midwest or not in a populated area. I live in Dallas, Fort Worth, and there's not a ton of hi-fi stores in a metro area of 7 million people or more. Can't always listen to it. You need to match your subs. Bullocks. I don't know. I think that's like a British way of saying that's BS. No, you don't have to match your subs at all. I almost always have 2 different subs running if I have 2 subs running at all. If I add another sub, they're not matched. Now, if you have 2 SVS subs that both have the app, that's probably ideal because you can adjust them from your seated position. But I have a Klipsch and then I have an SVS in my living room. They're both set at different gains and they're both in different locations. Matching 2 subs together is a great way for someone selling that sub to sell you a second sub. But you don't need 2 identical subwoofers to have great music or a movie experience. You need to match the center speaker to your front, right, and left speakers. Now, this is actually probably good advice, but in practice, I have run multiple. I used to run a Klipsch center and Polk front and lefts, and it was just fine. One experience when I heard a big difference between someone that was moving from the center speaker to the left speaker as far as the mix goes. And it was actually, I believe, a pair of Fluence speakers and a Klipsch center. And I've done this for years with home theater. So having to, yeah, is it great? Sure. Tone matched, whatever, yes. Timbre matched. I think it gets really crazy when people say you have to do that with your surround speakers. Yes, if you have the exact same speakers in the entirety of your home theater, then that's great. But you don't need to worry if you have a different center and different fronts. It'll be fine. But it's also another great way for people to sell you more speakers than you need. But your movie and music enjoyment is not going to be affected by it. In most cases, at least anecdotally, mine wasn't, except for one movie. That was Hobbs and Shaw. Could have been because Hobbs and Shaw is a horrible movie. You need balanced connectors. Gosh, balanced connectors are a big deal. You need them going out of your source, of your DAC, into your amplifier, and then out from your amplifier to the subwoofer. You need balance. Balanced. You need it. It's the best. Well, no, it's not. If you look at most, I think almost all, of the receivers in the 1970s, 1980s, probably even 1990s, they were single-ended, RCA, which means one signal and one ground. With balance, you have two signals 180 degrees out of phase, which in theory blocks out any interference, and then you have a ground. It seems like lately, within the last 5 years or so, there has been a push towards more balanced equipment, but it's also been way more affordable. So if you can get balance with affordable gear, great. Balance is used in pro audio because there's hundreds of feet of wires all over the place doing everything. So they need that interference rejection type of connection where you don't really need that most of the time in a home audio system or a home theater situation too. I have heard some difference in a headphone amp with balanced, but for speakers, I've never really heard a big difference. I've used it because it's been there and I've just had the cables, but don't think that going balanced is going to change your life because it will not change your life. Single-ended is just fine. Tone controls and EQ are the devil. I know a lot of these I've kind of mentioned in other videos before, but there has been a push, I don't know, maybe in the last 20 years or 10 years, that EQs and tone controls have been eliminated basically because it gets in the signal path and it's not pure. It's not how the artist intended it. Even though the amplifiers do have a certain sound, even though people will say an amplifier doesn't sound like anything. Really? I've listened to a lot of amplifiers, and most of them have a different sonic characteristic. Some of them sound a bit similar, but they're not just simply boosting a signal. And if you believe that, then you haven't listened to enough amplifiers. Anyway, tone controls and the loudness button, or loudness dial, have been around in audio for a long, long time. Very useful, and I still enjoy using tone controls and the loudness button today. Even better is the EQ. EQs also fell out of favor after the 90s, maybe the early 2000s. People stopped using them. But it is a great tool to be able to tailor the sound to your ears. Also, you can use it to mitigate some room issues, all sorts of issues, placement issues, level issues. So, tone controls and EQs are awesome, and anybody says that they just destroy the signal, well, I don't know. Maybe they do, but I've listened to a few EQs, and I don't think it's ever like destroyed anything. There's been one time where there was a breakdown in soundstage, but it had nothing to do with an EQ. I was running an RCA into a sub and then an RCA out of the sub, but I could have wired that thing out of phase. Who knows? Anyway, my point is the EQ, loudness, tone controls, they're all ways that we can enjoy our music better. But there's a belief in some people in this hobby that believe that tone controls and EQ are the devil. Don't believe them. Get them, use them, enjoy them. Very rarely have I found an amp and a preamp that sounds just perfect, that I don't want to tweak a little bit. It does happen, but not very often. you need a ton of power. No, you don't. Actually, it's amazing how little power we actually use. Conversely, though, it's kind of funny because I generally like to have a ton of headroom when it comes to an amplifier. But the math works out that I'm generally only listening at maybe 2 to 10 watts max. Rarely, if ever, am I going above 10 watts max. But again, there's sonic differences between amplifiers. So even though I may not be using all of that power, it seems like the more powerful amps are, well, they just sound better to me. But if you actually do the math, if you take a look at the sensitivity of a speaker, 1 watt at 1 meter is the SPL that speaker is going to make. Even a speaker with low sensitivity is usually around 85. 85 dB is loud. 90 dB is loud. 100 dB is like deafeningly loud. So chances are even 5 watts is going to do it. That's why all these really low powered tube amplifiers, which I was going to mention too, but we're leaving on it. That's why low powered tube amplifiers can get loud, because one doesn't really need all that much power. But again, it always seems like the more powerful the amp, the better it sounds to my ear. But don't anybody say you've got to have 100 watts for this speaker, because you don't. Here's the problem though. Not all low-powered amplifiers are created equally. So they all sound a bit different. But don't think you're going to need 1,000 watts to make something work. You may, and if something's below 85 dB for sensitivity, you probably want 50 to 100 watts on it. Because chances are the amplifier companies are lying about their power ratings anyway, too. So, anyway, I digress. You don't always need a ton of power, though. Class D sucks. Well, I kind of agree. I kind of mostly agree with that statement. However, there have been some Class D amplifiers that I think sound pretty good. Actually, the Buchard integrated amplifier, I think, sounds about as non-Class D as you can get. It's actually very, very warm sounding. But Class D tends to get a bad rap for good reason. It doesn't sound great. There's some harshness, there's some digital sheen, and outside of a small group of Class D amplifiers, I don't really care for them personally. They'll get the job done, they'll make music, but it doesn't have that inviting sound that I generally am drawn to. The good news is that there are a few Class D amplifiers out there that do sound good and are affordable. The IEMA stuff, DO3, AO7, AO8 Pro. Fozzy Audio is coming out with some really good sounding, inexpensive Class D amplifiers. And then Buchard. But Buchard's amp is super expensive. So people are going to say Class D sucks. And I kind of agree with it. But there are some exceptions to that rule. So if you want to support the channel, you can sign up for Patreon. Patreon.com/CheapAudioMan. Patreon-only Zooms, Discord, Facebook group. You can also use the links in the description. Those are affiliate links, which means if you click and you buy, I get a commission, but it doesn't cost you any more. So it's a great way to support the channel. You can also use the thanks button down by the share button. Buy me a cup of coffee, but don't feel compelled to buy me anything. So don't binge watch anything on Netflix or Hulu. Binge listen and fill your soul with happiness. And with that, I'm Randy. I'm the Cheap Audio Man.